Hi, everyone. Welcome to Science at the Museum, a part of Mondays at the Museum's STEM at the Museum series. My name is Emily Mahon, and I love museums. I love how they teach us about the world around us, and I love how they teach us about ourselves. It's from this love that I decided to create my business, Mondays at the Museum, so that I can share my passion and excitement about learning our stories as humans on this amazing planet. I have the best job in the world, too. I work at a museum. I've worked at many museums for many years, and I am excited to share everything that I've learned and keep learning with you. Throughout today's video, I'll be offering pause and reflect opportunities that will allow you to pause the video and think about what we've been talking about, or have a conversation with your teacher or maybe your classmates on a prompt or question that I provide. So let's pause and reflect. What do you think a museum is? This is your chance to have a conversation. Go ahead and pause the video, and then when you're ready, go ahead and join back in. Here's my definition. Museums are spaces that tell stories about people, places, and things using objects and or images. It's that simple. The space could be anything. The space could be a small room, it could be an outdoor space, it could be a virtual space, or it could be a big, beautiful architectural masterpiece. But all these spaces are there to tell stories about people, places, and things using objects and or images of all kinds. Now that we have a clear understanding of what a museum is, in today's lesson, we will explore how science, technology, engineering, and math are used at the museum and found in art and artifacts at the museum and all around us. We will learn the differences between S, T, E, and M, and focus primarily today on science, technology, and engineering. Make sure to get my other video, Math at the Museum, to get a really in-depth look at math at the museum. But today we're looking at science, technology, and engineering. We're going to start by discussing the difference between science, technology, engineering, and math. You may have heard the acronym STEM before, or maybe STEAM, where we add A for art. It's used so much that sometimes we forget that these areas of study are all very different and have different definitions and goals, even though they work very closely together. So here we go. Science is how we learn and understand the world around us by asking questions, observing, and experimenting. Something we do all the time. Engineering is applying what we learn and understand about the world around us to solve problems or to make things. And technology is using science and engineering to make processes and products that make our life better. And of course, math. Math is the easiest definition of all. It's the study of numbers, shapes, and patterns. Pretty simple. So first thing we're going to talk about is science. Because science is all about asking questions, we're going to try and answer these two questions. First, why can't we touch everything at the museum? And what happens if something breaks? So before we move on, let's take a quick pause and reflect. And what do you think? Take a minute to think or talk about these questions before we move on. So let's start with our first question. Why can't we touch everything at the museum? We have to start with matter. Everything in the world, everything in the universe is made out of matter. Stars, chairs, shoes, hair, teeth, cars, cats, paintings, sculptures, everything is made out of matter. And all matter breaks down eventually. This is called decomposition. Some matter or materials take longer than others to decay, and some fall apart very quickly and easily. How quickly things break down or decay can often be caused by what kind of environment they're in. Some things like this Egyptian mummy has lasted like 5,000 years, and that's because it's been kept in a dark, cool, dry environment. But if we touch it with our warm hands and leave behind oily residue, or leave it in a bright, warm, sunny, humid room, it would quickly decay. Ancient Egyptians used a salt solution called natron to kill or to slow down the bacteria that caused the decay in the human body. Paintings and artifacts are also made out of materials that decay and are sensitive to light and heat and humidity. All materials have their own ecosystems in which they thrive. Museum professionals, called conservators, use the science of conservation to conserve or preserve materials so that they continue to tell stories to many future generations. They have to know a lot about how materials react to all sorts of environments, how to maintain objects and images, and how to fix them when they're broken, with tools, chemicals, and processes that ensure that they stay intact for many, many, many years. So remember that dry mummy on the last slide? Ancient Egyptians used a salt solution called natron that caused a chemical reaction which killed or slowed down the bacteria that caused decay in the human body. They then wrapped up the mummy and placed it in a special dry, cool environment to keep it from decaying too fast. Kind of like a fisherman spreads salt on the fish they catch, or hunters spread salt on the meat or the game that they shoot, to preserve the meat to eat at a later day. Conservators use similar solutions to preserve artifacts, paintings, rugs, or the way we call them textiles, old clothing and paper products to slow down the natural processes of decay. But why can't we touch art? Well, it's kind of like what you've been learning about weathering and erosion in your school. When you touch things, you leave behind oils from your fingers. These oils and the constant act of touching can break down the matter and create grooves or dents, kind of like glaciers that move across the land over time. It can also alter the colors of the paint because many of the paints have their own oils that would then have a chemical reaction to the oils from your fingers and change color. Even stone can wear away from constant touching and important things that are carved into the stone. And those things could be rubbed so thin that you can't read them anymore. The heat from too much sunlight or lamplight can also have a chemical reaction with the paints of a painting and dull the colors and lines, kind of like this image. A conservator used very special tools to restore this painting after it had been damaged by the sun's heat. So let's take a trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York to learn a little bit more about what conservators do, especially if something breaks. You can watch these videos on your own anytime by going to metkids.org and exploring their site. It's super cool, it's free, and it's available to everybody. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Owen, and I'm 10. Today I'm here with Carolyn. She's a conservator here at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, meaning she restores broken statues.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Riccardelli, and I'm an objects conservator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
I am here to talk with Carolyn, and hopefully she'll answer some of my questions about Adam.
This is your first time seeing it?
Yes.
What do you think?
It's a really interesting piece. You can get a lot out of his expression and the way he's positioned, and I think it just tells a story in itself. I hear there's a really interesting story behind Adam. Can you tell me what it is?
This sculpture fell down onto the floor and broke. And it was a very sad day, but here he is back in the gallery. We cleaned it up in a very organized way because we wanted to make sure we always kept track of the fragments that were close together, sort of like an archaeological dig.
It broke around the ankle, right?
It did. The sculpture basically came away from its base.
By the way, how much exactly does Adam weigh?
The sculpture weighs about 780 pounds.
That's a lot. So why was it so important to put Adam back together?
Well, this sculpture is a very important work of art from the Renaissance. It's actually described by art historians as the first monumental nude of the Renaissance that looks back to ancient examples of sculpture, like the Greeks and the Romans. So he's really important. He's like a turning point in art history.
So it was really important for the museum to get Adam back together.
I put out for you most of the things that I use to work on Adam, tool-wise and some materials. And this is what we use to put Adam together. We like very tiny, precise tools.
Do you recognize this from your dentist's office?
This is one of the very common tools that a conservator uses, and it's a bamboo skewer. This is something that you can actually touch. You can pick up that arm.
Yes, that's heavy.
It feels heavy, right?
Yeah, it doesn't look heavy, but it's really heavy.
That's a model of Adam's right arm. With a lot of stuff, we practiced a lot on it, so there's stuff all over it. This is why we used the model, because we didn't want to get the sculpture dirty or get any adhesive on it until we knew exactly what we're doing.
Well, some conservators' technology is really high tech, like the laser scanning, computer animation. Some of it is just bamboo stick and cotton. It's one of the best tools. To be a conservator, you need a lot of knowledge about tools, from something really simple to something like a 3D scan. You need to know chemistry. You need a lot of talent and skills. I'd recommend that you come to see Adam, because with Adam you can really admire the sculpture, how the conservators put all the pieces back together, and you can really look at it and see how big a deal it is that conservators are here to help restore priceless pieces. They're heroes of the Metropolitan Museum. This is Owen reporting from the Objects Conservation Department.
So let's take a minute to pause and reflect. What kind of scientific skills do you think a conservator needs to do their work? And is this something you might be interested in doing someday? Now that we've looked at science at the museum, let's remind ourselves of what engineering means. Engineering is applying what we learn and understand about the world around us to solve problems or to make things. Now, I know you've all looked and seen the engineering process. First, you ask a question, then you imagine, then you plan, then you create, you improve on your work, and then you share your work. Sounds about right. We all know the engineering process. But now, I've added the artistic process. So when we go to art and culture museums, we see a lot of art. And so we're going to look at how engineering process and the artistic process are very similar, and maybe how some engineers might be quite artistic and some artists might be quite engineering minded. So let's look and see the similarities and maybe point out some of the differences between the engineering process and the artistic process. So this visual might not be as clear as it could be, but let's find out. So I put some arrows here. First of all, both the artist and the engineer ask a question. The artist might more find an inspiration or might very well ask a question. How can I share what I'm seeing with other people? How can I share what I'm feeling with other people? An engineer might look at something and say, how can I make that better? How can I make this easier for me to use? Or how can I make this so that it works for someone else? So usually it's finding an inspiration or asking a question. Very similar. And then from that, you start to imagine, research ideas and methods and techniques. And that's on both sides. So an engineer is going to research all the kinds of materials that they might be able to use and the different techniques that they need to use to make that happen. Just like an artist is going to have to do that. They're going to have to think about, what am I going to use? Paints? Am I going to sculpt it? Am I going to make it three-dimensional? And the same process goes along with the engineering. So they've asked a question, they've found an inspiration, they start researching and imagining how that's going to happen. And then they start to plan. They start putting all those researching and ideas into actual plan or practice. So they start planning it out and practicing it, putting it out there, and making sure that they got their plan in place. And then it's the fun part. Then it's the creating part. And that creating part for both the scientists and the artists are coming together and using science to experiment. I'm going to put this color with this. That doesn't work. Let's try this color. How does this work with it? Does this tell the story I'm trying to tell? How am I doing this? The same thing happens with the engineer. Hey, does this mechanical piece go with this mechanical piece? Is this going to do what I need it to do and tell the story I need it to do? So they're both creating, and sometimes this creative process can take super long. Sometimes it's super quick because they've done lots of research and lots of planning. And then they reflect on it, they look at it, they try it out, they improve it, they might tweak a few things, but both the artist and the engineer are both tweaking and looking and revising and making it just right. And then they both have to come to a conclusion that they're finished. That might be the hardest part of saying, you know what? I've done my best. This is what it is. This is the end. Same thing with an artist. I could make more, but I'm pretty sure this tells the story I'm looking for. And then they both share their work. They share it with other people so that other people can learn and get a better process, have a different a mechanical thing that makes their life easier. Or maybe they get to see and understand and be inspired by the same thing that the artist was inspired by. So the engineers and the artists are very, very similar. And so it's something to think about whenever you're at the museum and how you're looking at the different art from that engineering perspective and that artistic perspective. So we're going to watch a video here on the next slide where you're going to be able to compare the engineering process and the artistic process and see if you can see them overlapping and if people are using one over the other. Hopefully we can follow the sequence of actions and see what kind of processes these students are using to animate their ideas and inspirations.
Animation to me is when you make something that doesn't look like it's made in real life come to life. We're learning about these composite creatures for our animations.
And a composite creature is like a mixed creature with something else. With another creature or a human or anything.
Right now, I'm doing the crown for the Ganesh close-up. Our composite creature were called the winged runner, and for our animation, we made the winged runner into a female.
And we also did some research on the thing, so we knew what we had to do.
My favorite part of this week is when we went to the galleries.
It was more fun working on the computer and with the clay. I really like that the best. I learned how to do that. I learned how to make a movie with clay.
So to animate, we had to do little actions by little. So first action, like a little kind, and then take a picture. Another action, take a picture, and so on.
Yeah, it took a long time to make each one.
week. It was really cool, the drawing and the colors and the different things, and it was so much fun.
Ganesha and the Sphinx are composite creatures. Ancient composite creatures, to be exact.
So let's do a quick pause and reflect after that video. Do you agree that the scientific process and the artistic process are similar? Why or why not? How did you notice the student animators in the video using the engineering process? How did you notice the student animators in the video using the artistic process? How do you use the scientific method and the artistic process yourself? And my final question for reflection, are scientists or engineers like artists? And are artists like engineers? And can you be both? But what about technology? We've talked about science and engineering. Did we leave out technology? Do you remember what technology is? Technology is using science and engineering to make products and processes that make life better. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure we've been using technology this whole time. Museums have been working super hard to digitize their collections or make them so that they can be on a screen instead of in your hands, to be able to code these amazing websites and learning platforms so that our lives can be made better by getting to learn from all these amazing museums from all over the world. Here's a quick example before we end our time together with a challenge. We're going to visit 3 different museums who have used computer science to build the technology for us to be able to have access and interact with their amazing collections. Feel free to skip through the video to see the particular museum you're most interested in, or pause and come back to watch more later. Welcome to the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. The National Museum of Natural History is part of the Smithsonian Museum, which is huge. And the National Museum of Natural History has put together some really cool virtual tours for us. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of what they've done. Now, they've come up with a way of really being able to interact with what they have. So we're going to look just at their regular exhibitions, the ones that you can see anytime that you're there. So check this out. I'm going to move my box so that you can see everything. This is the entrance to the Natural History Museum. This is amazing. Look at this. You can go to this anytime you want to. What we can do with this is I can use my mouse and just scroll, and I can look up at this beautiful domed ceiling. And if you were here for our math program, you can see some of the tessellations and some of the beautiful symmetry and structure and math that they have and the way that they were able to design this incredible architecture. We've got this elephant right in the entrance just to show us how big this space is. So when you visit this, you can turn around, really feel like you're in the entrance at the Natural History Museum. How amazing. And there's the information desk. You'll see these in every single museum, the most important place in the museum where you can really get to know what to do. The cool thing that I like about what they've done with their interactive virtual tours is they've created this really nice map that we can use. It shows us where we are and it shows us where we're facing. So we can go into any one of these and be able to look at all of these things and kind of know where we're going. We have an idea of what we want to see. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the Hall of Fossils. We see that we're already kind of pointed that way. So we're going to move here and go straight ahead following this arrow. There we go. Journey through deep time. How cool is this? So what we can do as we go through here is maybe think of some of the things that we've been learning about how scientists work in a museum and what we can learn from science. So let's look at this. The very first thing we see here is a fossil of what looks like a mammoth. So I'm going to scroll nice and big. And I'm close. Let's read what this label says. It says American mastodon. Mastodons are more distinctly related to living elephants than mammoths are, more like third cousins than siblings. When mastodons went extinct, the distinctive history of their genome, the complete set of their genetic information, was lost forever. Isn't that amazing? So we can already see how engineering is used at the museum. How do you see engineering being used right here in front of you? Well, I see that they've created these special stands to make sure that these fossils are able to stand up, because the fossils are not actual bones anymore. They're not connected to tendons. They're not connected to all the muscles that allow them to stand up on their own. And so engineers had to come up with a way of creating a way to keep these fossils standing up the way that they would have when the animal was alive. So let's go back a little bit. First instance of engineering. And then let's look also at what's going on here. So this mastodon is a fossil. It's a fossil. It's and all a fossil really is a rock in the shape of what that animal used to be, what the skeleton used to be. So the bones have all deteriorated and decayed, just like we talked about at the beginning. They're made out of matter. They deteriorated, but what was left in place is that minerals came into the place where the bones were, and they created reconstructions of what those bones were out of rock. And so it's like petrified bone. And so a fossil is really just rocks in the shape of what the bones used to look like, but they're very detailed and look just like them. So we can look at this. This is a fossil, and you can tell it's not underneath any kind of preserve or anything like that, because we know that we can't touch it. No one's going to be reaching up or climbing over these walls to touch it. And as long as the room is at the right humidity and they're not having too much light on it, not much is going to happen to this stone. So considering the kind of material that they're displaying here, they didn't have to be extra careful with it the way that they might have if there was like actual leather or actual animal skin that they had to preserve and make sure that it was inside of a special ecosystem. So let's keep going through here. See what else we can see. So the cool thing about the technology is not only is the technology in the actual design of the website itself and our virtual tour, but also in the exhibit or the exhibitions that they have on display. Each one of these exhibits includes some sort of a way to make your learning easier and better. So they have lights shining through here to make it easier for you to be able to read all the words and really interact with what's going on. Each one of these things has little buttons that you can push to learn more and see what's happening with the impact on the earth. Especially at science museums, you're going to see a lot of things that allow you to interact and touch and play with. And a lot of this really comes down to computer science, their ability to be able to use science and engineering and then add on this whole other language that tells these different mechanical pieces to do what you want it to do. It's an if-then idea. Is if I push this, then this lights up. Really simple, but what is based in what computer science is. So if we go through here, we're going to see lots of awesome, cool things. So the technology that was used to help tell the story was different from what the technology was at maybe 30, 40 years ago at this same museum. Museums are always trying to find new ways of making learning easier for the people around them. So museums are on the forefront of technology. They're really interested in how can I better tell this story to the people who are going to come to my space. And the best way to do that is through technology in many ways. And technology can be low tech, lo-fi, or hi-fi. And what they've done here is really added a lot of nice pizzazz and hi-fi technology to make it fun and interactive for everyone. I'm going to show you a real quick thing before we move on to our next museum, because there's lots of stuff for us to look at and we can't stay in this museum too long. The nice thing about this, though, is that you can go anytime you want to. All you have to do is look up the National Natural History Museum, Smithsonian. It'll pop up, look for their virtual tours, and spend all day just playing and going through all these incredible exhibitions. and playing with all the exhibits. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys something kind of cool. So when I talk about computer science, what I'm talking about is coding, really. I'm specifically talking about the coding part of computer science. And that's this kind of binary language, this if or then. It basically follows just binary numbers and provides a very basic way of telling a computer how to do things. So you tell it in a very specific way to do something and it'll happen. That's how websites are developed. So I'm going to show you something, and you can do this on your computers anytime. So you can see the code behind what it is that you're looking at. So there's all this different language and all this cool science behind what you're looking at that that scientists are using to help make your life better and help make it easier for you to learn. So let's look at this. I'm going to push function and then F12. And you're going to see, I'm going to move my head out of the way. And look at this. So look at all these different, there's all this different language. There's JavaScript. You can tell how this was written. This is HTML, all these different languages, and it tells us what to do. It's all the different stuff. So we can look through this and see how this was built and the properties and how it's built together. So this itself is science. It might not be in the museum, but it's definitely helping to tell the story that's inside the museum. So I always think that's super cool. And the only reason that I found out about it is because I kept accidentally hitting function F12 while I was typing things. And I get so frustrated because all of a sudden I was accidentally changing code. But once I figured it out, I was like, this is actually pretty cool. I get to see what's going on behind the scenes and how all of this stuff is built. So let's go ahead and go to our next museum. Hey guys, we're in London, England, and now we're at the British Museum. This is so exciting. I went to the British Museum when I was 11 years old. Some of you might be 11 years old, and it was the greatest and most exciting experience. I got to see all these things from the ancient world that I would never have seen where I was living. So it's really cool to be able to see this and be sitting in my living room watching this. So here we are at the British Museum, and I've chosen specifically the Egyptian sculpture area because it's really cool. And one of the objects that I wanted us to look at here is the Rosetta Stone. So the Rosetta Stone is right here, and I'm going to make this nice and big so you all can see and we can read a little bit about it. And feel free to come to the British Museum online and look through all of this stuff and look closer and really ask questions, just like we've been doing throughout this whole experience. You can do this. They use a special platform called Google Arts and Culture. So the Smithsonian Natural History Museum that we went to earlier, if you were able to go on that visit with us, uses its own platform, and it had its own coding and a different way of telling the story. And the British Museum is using Google Arts and Culture. So this is almost like when you put in something in a map on Google Maps and you can find it and kind of search for it. It's the same thing, and it's inside of a museum. It's really cool. And so what this allows us to do is you can even see in the reflection here, I think this is fun. You can see the setup of how they were able to take the picture for Google Maps right there. So you can see how the technology was there to take the picture, and then it's uploaded. And then it comes in every once in a while to update, especially if there's a new exhibition or a new exhibit on display. But the reason I wanted to show you the Rosetta Stone is because not only is the Rosetta Stone one of the most important archaeological finds of our entire lives, it's the only way that we know how to interpret hieroglyphics, which is the way that the ancient Egyptians used to write. They would use pictures and pictograms instead of the letters that we understand. And so this rock with 3 different types of writing on it allowed us to better understand what those hieroglyphics meant, so that now we know more about the ancient Egyptians than we would have before. But what's something interesting about the Rosetta Stone is that we were talking in our presentation about how things need to be in a special case, and it creates a special environment. So if you look around behind, you can see that some of these sculptures are not in a special case. They're totally out there because the material that they have doesn't decay as quickly as maybe another kind of material. We talked about that at the Natural History Museum too. The mastodon didn't need to be as protected as, say, a piece of leather or animal skin, just because of the kind of matter that it is. But here we are looking at a rock, a stone. It's literally called the Rosetta Stone, and it's inside of a case, but all those sculptures behind it aren't inside of a case. Why is that? Well, here's a little something interesting. When I was at the British Museum when I was 11 years old, the Rosetta Stone was not inside of a case. It was out there. And here, let me tell you something that I probably shouldn't be sharing to everyone. I was 11 and I reached over and I touched the Rosetta Stone. That was a big no-no. And I got my hand slapped literally. So I did not, I learned very quickly I wasn't supposed to do that. But lots of people coming through and accidentally touching things like that and touching the stone can wear away at the stone the way we were talking about at the beginning of the time together. So remember how I said all those oils and constant touching can wear down all the really important writing on a stone? This might be some of the most important writing ever written on a stone. And if people keep touching it and creating that friction and wearing it down over time, we could lose all the important information that we have on the front of the Rosetta Stone. So even though the material doesn't break down or decay the way that other kinds of material does, this is about keeping it safe from people touching it so that those words and all of that stuff doesn't get worn away over time. And we can keep this for many generations to come. So while we're here, let's take a moment to just enjoy and walk around this amazing museum. You see, there's more than just the artifacts that you can look at. My favorite thing to do when I go to a museum is check out the ceiling, because there's almost always something cool and hidden, or the ceiling is just as beautiful as the artwork around it. Let's just look around here. So we can tell these are sculptures. These are made out of stone. These are made out of very strong minerals that are not going to break down very much over time. And so they don't need to be as covered as others. But there are always reasons why some are under cover and some are not. And most of it has to do with science and us wanting to keep things from decaying any faster than they should. So let's go one more place in the British Museum while we're here, just because we can. Let's see. Let's go in here. We'll stick with our Egyptian theme. And here we are looking at some sarcophagi. Sarcophagi or sarcophagus is kind of like anything that you would put someone who dies, you would put it in them, a coffin. It's basically a coffin. And so these are all made out of wood. So the difference between a stone and wood is very significant. We all know that. If you build something out of wood, eventually it gets rained on and it's out in the sun, it gets really dry. And wood is can fall apart much faster than stone. If you build a house out of stone, it'll probably last a lot longer if you build a house out of wood, even though both will last a really long time. And these sarcophagi have definitely lasted a very long time, upwards of 5,000, 3,000 years each. And they all have this beautiful paint and pigment still on them. But the way that they were preserved was in a cool, dry place without a lot of light. And so they need to be kept in that place so that they don't decay any more than they already are. So they have to make sure that they're behind a glass case, and that case is kept beautifully clean. And they want to make sure that the lighting is just right so that the heat of the light isn't affecting them and making the pigments get less brilliant. And they're also making sure that it's nice and dry, not too humid and not too dry either, so that the wood maintains an equilibrium. So it's not too dry and not too cold, kind of like the Goldilocks idea. And so they keep them inside of that case. So apart from the absolutely beautiful pieces of art that they also tell us a lot about the science behind how they're preserved so that people 100 years from now, 200 years from now can still get to learn all about this amazing culture from ancient Egypt. Okay, are you ready to go to our next museum? Here we go. Welcome to Paris, France, and the Louvre, probably the most famous museum in the entire world. I love this site. Now, I do not speak French, nor do I read French. So I have a hard time reading some of the labels that they have on their online site, but it doesn't keep me from being able to explore and enjoy this amazing space. So many different ways to enjoy the Louvre, and they have lots of different virtual tours that you can go on, mainly in one gallery, and you can go through and click on things. So now remember, the Smithsonian Natural History Museum had a map similar to this one. You can see down here in the corner, there's also a map here. And we're noticing this is not part of the Google Arts and Culture. So these three museums have used three different platforms to be able to tell their story. And they're telling it in different ways. And that's what's so cool about all the different museums is there's different people that are on staff who are all there to tell a story, and they find different ways of doing that. It's just a fantastic thing because we can hear lots of similar stories in a very different way and learn something different from each side. So here we are in one of the galleries at the Louvre, and there's some incredible pieces of art here. And all of the different platforms have their own kind of drawbacks and their own special things about them. This one is kind of draggy, sometimes a little hard to move around, but it still works just fine. This exhibition is all about movement. So it's all about movement in art, whether it's in a painting or whether it's in a sculpture. And so when you're looking at these things, you want to look for how the artist displayed movement. And so let's look at this also through our scientific eye that we've been learning through. Let's look at this as conservators and explore this a little bit more closely. So this has two different types of art. We have a sculpture here and we have a painting. And both of them are not behind any kind of a glass case, but you are still not allowed to touch them because you don't want to be messing around with any of the pigments on there. The cool thing about this tour is you can click on these eyes to get more information about each one of the pieces. So we can tell from here a little bit more about this painting. So now if you know French, it's a little bit easier. If you don't know French, you can always put copy and paste this into your Google Translate, and it'll give you a pretty good translation. Google Translate doesn't always give you all the same kind of inflections that you would get if you were talking to a native speaker or an expert in the art. But you can also look really closely at the painting. We can look very closely at this. We can get so close to really look at the movement and how this is created. We can look at the kind of paint and what the edges look like. We can maybe even tell how many layers of paint went into this. So maybe while the artist was creating their process, how many different trial and errors did they go through? Kind of like we were looking at in the engineering process. How many times did they paint over something and change something that we can't necessarily see here, but if you look closely, you might be able to see. You can see the edges here as well. It's absolutely beautiful and really cool. So we can I think we can go back. Let's close that out. Oh, that just goes down. Oh, I close it out that way. I see. And then we've got this. So we can go around and look. This one's very smooth. We can look down there. There's some Parisian security guard at the Louvre looking down and making sure no one's touching anything. Really cool stuff. Let's see, we're at a new museum. Let's look at the ceiling, see if the ceiling has anything cool about it, or if we're able to even do that on this. I don't think I can do that in here. Okay, let's see what else we've got. Let's go down here. We can look into this little alcove. Even more. Oh my goodness, so many beautiful things. So we do see some things underneath cases so that we can, so we're not looking at them. Here we go. This tells us lots of different things. This is another Egyptian experience of how they're showing movement and how they did that 5,000 years ago versus what we looked at earlier, which was from only maybe 400 years ago. Art evolves as we learn new ways of showing movement and using color and using all of the different tools we have on our hands. Technology is all around us. Life is all about changing and making process and things easier for everyone else. So let's go ahead and leave the Louvre And you can come back here anytime you want to and explore. Maybe you can use some math ideas. Maybe you can look at the art. Lots of different cool things to do, but definitely pay attention. Go to the Louvre. You can do it from your living room, and it's free. So awesome. So finally, I always like to leave everyone with a challenge. Museums are all about science. So I challenge you to go to a museum and look at the artifacts or the images that are under plexiglass cases. And ask yourself, why are these pieces under a case and others aren't? What kind of ecosystem do these materials need to keep from decomposing? What evidence do you have for your hypothesis? And look at pieces that have been touched a lot. Do you see how oils from the hands have created weathering patterns? Lots of cool questions, and I'm sure you came up with even more questions that you can ask yourself next time you go to a museum. And finally, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at museummondays@gmail.com. I love getting questions, and I would be more than happy to answer or point you in the right direction. Please make sure that you follow me on Teachers Pay Teachers and see what other new cool videos come out. I'm more than happy to create new videos and work with teachers to see what we can do to help share the beauty and amazingness of museums. With that, I thank you so much for sharing this time with me and for letting me share my time with you. And I look forward to seeing you soon, possibly on a Monday at the museum. Bye.